Right, I think we're ready to go. Brilliant. Okay, so hard to believe, but we're on to the last block of the day. I don't know about you, but for me, the time has flown by. It's been such a fantastic day. And we're going to kick it off with, well, one of my favorite speakers, because I first heard Robin speak at least 10 years ago now. It's been quite a while, and it had quite an impact. And I know other web designers, web developers who have been really affected by what Robin has had to say. And what I love about Robin is his relentless optimism when it comes to technology. I mean, we can be pretty cynical and jaded sometimes when new things come out, and we fail to see the potential in technology. But Robin always manages to see, yeah, the optimistic side of things. So, with that build-up, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Robin Christopherson.
And this is Archie as well. Good boy. Down. Good boy. Archie. He'll calm down in a second. So thank you so much for that. That was far too big a build-up. That's terrible. I'm under real pressure now. So what I'd like to talk about this afternoon is what I always talk about, which is the power of technology to help and even transform people's lives, and the huge importance, Archie, the huge importance of you guys in being the, or not being the broken link in the chain, in helping out and making sure that what you provide, your products, your services, are going to be accessible and inclusive as possible. So without further ado, I've just got a few slides to begin with, and then we'll have a look at a couple of videos and things like that. If you'll apologize for having these earbuds in, because we had some funny stuff going on with the sound, and it's only coming through the audio out at the moment. So this is, I've got this lady talking to me in my ears, so please put up with that. So, so technology has made a massive impact on people's lives, me included, and we're now in an age of computing where you could arguably say it's extreme computing, extreme use cases. And so here we've got somebody who's looking at a smaller screen, well, a mobile phone screen, average size mobile phone, and this might not be you guys. I've got no idea. I can't see what you're like, but you might all be young and svelte with 20/20 vision. And so this probably isn't you with the reading glasses, but it's certainly a lot of your users, a lot of your customers. And if it's not a question of not having 20/20 vision, then it might just be that you're out and about on a sunny day, and this small screen, it's not in a controlled environment, it's not a big 21-inch iMac in your room where if the sun comes in, then you can banish it into your dark den-like lair by closing your blackout curtains or whatever. This is out and about, this is extreme computing, and it's absolutely vital that what you do is fit for purpose for these people. So we're not talking about disabled people necessarily, we're talking about all of your customers who are disabled by the environment, because we're now in the age of computing on the go, what I would call extreme computing. We're really living on the edge here, where what you do, the decisions you make throughout your dev and design processes really count. Every single decision really counts. So for somebody like this, they would really benefit from having a good default font size, a sensible choice of font, good color contrast, use the color contrast analyzer checkers to make sure that they pass the WCAG guideline for that, and have a nice uncluttered layout on these small screens. Obviously, websites are predominantly mobile ready these days, or many of them are getting that way. Make sure that what you present on the screen is nice and uncluttered with good use of white space and having everything sort of simple and clean. But above all, make sure that the default presentation for these small screens isn't mean, isn't poor color, poor contrast, etc. And when you'll be helping people who are on a sunny day or just a small screen, or haven't brought their reading glasses with them, you're going to be helping people with a vision impairment regardless of the size of their particular mobile, or when they're viewing it on a larger screen as well. So here we've got somebody who's trying to use their phone whilst they've got a cup of coffee in the other hand. I have done that on many occasions. And this person, they're juggling their phone with one hand. And if that isn't easy to use, if the touch points, tappable areas aren't nice and big, separated with good white space, then they're easily going to be hitting the wrong one. and they're temporarily motor impaired, by circumstance here, just as somebody who has, Parkinson's or fibromyalgia, whatever it might be, that would give them that same requirement regardless, 24/7. So someone like this, juggling it one-handed, we've all done it. We might have been pushing a buggy, or in my case, a guide dog. In fact, I don't push him. He pulls me. But you get what I mean. So similarly, this chap, he's got a cup of coffee here. He could be in his coffee break at the moment. He could be in a real rush. He wants to do something on his phone. He wants to buy something on Amazon, or he wants to go to your website and find out a piece of information. He's got 90 seconds to do that. No more, no less. He is trying to do it, and without the extreme UX that you guys all strive for, then he's not going to be able to do it in 90 seconds, and who knows, a little bit later on, he might remember that your site wasn't up to scratch, or your app, so he'll go somewhere else when he's got a bit more time, and he'll perform the transaction there, so you've lost that customer. So that extreme UX that's required, that's insisted upon by extreme use cases, extreme environments, is something that someone, for example, with a learning disability, or perhaps dyslexia in many cases, has a significant overlap, and that's 6% of the population that have got severe dyslexia, that would benefit from that 24/7. So there's so many overlaps, so many parallels. Please don't think of accessibility as being this thing that you need to think about to help disabled people. Here we got somebody, I couldn't find, I don't know, this person hasn't got particularly fat fingers, have they? I don't know. I think from what I couldn't find I wanted someone with like grossly oversized fingers. Phones are getting bigger and bigger all the time, we know that, but not everybody has got like a jumbo phablet type phone that when they actually are using calls, which you do from time to time, to use it for calls, it's like an iPad strapped to the side of their head. So, but some people do have jumbo-sized fingers. And, oh, there's somebody there. I'll take a photo of you later and I'll replace it with this one for a minute. So, again, tappable areas, separation, not having clickable areas or touch spots in too much proximity, too close proximity, is vital for these people. And whilst phones are getting bigger, there's always going to be people that have that difficulty because they're juggling it one-handed, because they've got a motor difficulty permanently, as we mentioned about earlier. So, and what about if you've got no fingers at all, or you can't use your fingers? Someone like Professor Stephen Hawking, for example, he needs to be able to interact with your content, your functionality. So you need to make sure that your web apps, your websites, your app, your mobile apps support proper navigational schemas that we'll look at a little bit later on. So normally people, when they're using their phones in their cars, which we all do, I'm in the passenger seat, but you guys, you should be ashamed of yourself. So, you might have it on a dashboard. You might use an app like a sat-nav, GPS thing. You set it going before you go, and you interact with it very seldomly. You'll glance at it from time to time, but mostly it's talking to you. And if you're relying on using it to get from A to B, you're probably going to be listening more than watching, or at least you should be. So what we've got here is somebody who's got a blank screen on their phone, and that's because it really behoves you when you're thinking about how your customers, how your clients are going to be interacting with your content and functionality, that well, let's think about not having any UI at all. Let's assume that they've got as good as a blank phone with them, and they're not going to be able to see any elements of your UI. They're not going to be able to interact with it in any significant way. So there you're looking at different input and output methodologies. So Professor Hawking, he needs to be able to interact using the scanning facility built into iOS, for example, in a single switch connected by Bluetooth. Other people will be able to just wave at the phone while it's mounted on the dashboard, for example, to be able to interact with it in some way. But most of the time it will be speech output and voice control, for example, like Siri perhaps, although recent research has shown that that's still quite dangerous to interact in any significant way. But just think about all these different extreme use cases and how, and ask yourself, is what you're doing going to, how's it going to fare in that particular circumstance? And some of the things that we're going on to look at now, did I just press that by mistake? Let's have a look. Yeah, I did that with my cuff. So we'll look at in a moment, some of the key ways, and hopefully you guys don't, this is not a grandma and egg situation here, but so moving on to disability. So people definitely with a disability here, we've got people who happy smartphone users, and disabled people really love their smartphones. They absolutely love them because they are absolutely game-changing. I mean, I could spend, if I had 45 minutes showing you different apps that I use on a daily basis, all that use the camera, for example. You know, you might think that as a blind person, the one bit of my phone that I wouldn't get much joy out of is the camera. Well, when you've got a pair of eyes that don't work and you've got one with some smarts behind it that does, then, you know, you use it very, very heavily. So, you know, they love their smartphones, they love their other technology. It's up to you guys to make sure that you're not that broken link in the chain, and that what you do, what they're accessing with these fantastic accessible platforms are going to be accessible too. Even things like wearables, on my watch here, you know, I can see
Sunset, 5:50 p.m.
Oh, sunset's at 5:50. You might be thinking, why does a blind person want to know about when sunset is? But it's actually fasting time for me. If you want to Google which religion is fasting at this time of the year, then feel free. So, yeah, I've got all these fancy complications. It tells me,
3 to 5 p.m. Speaking at Enhanced Conf in
I don't know if you're getting that, but it's telling me that I'm speaking at Enhanced Conf in London. So, plaster your phone with your watch screen with complications. I don't mind it that it's the least sexy looking of the clock faces. It's jam-packed with information for me. So you all know about WCAG, right? Yep, one person does. So web content accessibility guidelines, I'm not going to go over those. They've been around for well over a decade. But you may or may not know about the web mobile app best practices. So here on the screen, what we've got here, we've got a URL at the bottom. I'll tweet round to my Twitter handle, thingamybob, at USA2, number 2 day, after I sit down, what all the things, you know, the links to that we've got on the slideshows here and on the videos that I'm going to show a little bit later on. But just here are pulling out some of the mobile web app best practices here that you may or may not know about. Visit that URL later and have a look. But teasing out a couple of the ones here that are more specifically about accessibility or inclusive design. So number 5, set users free. Choice of interfaces. Now, you probably all, where there is a, you know, alternative versions, a mobile version and a desktop version of your website, for example, Amazon, Argos, people like that, they have a link to the desktop version of the site. And that's what this is talking about. But also, we would argue to go the other way as well. So on a desktop browser, offer a link to the mobile version. I would pick that any day of the week. It's a completely different experience for a disabled person to surf a much more slimmed down, cleaned up version without all the dross of the main site. And because we're in a mobile age now, mobile first, these mobile versions of websites aren't the poor cousins that they used to be. So it's a really nice experience there. So we would definitely argue that you should do that. And going right back to the first slide where that person's struggling to see their screen, if you can offer a style switcher, then, you know, we all know the poor performance of websites when you pinch and zoom on small phones. Either they do nothing or you get horizontal scrolling, and that's not a full solution. So those style switchers in a mobile-ready environment are very, very powerful, so I definitely recommend that as well. Preserving the focus. Web apps and web pages are very dynamic these days, and for me it's the bane of my life. I'm reading something changes somewhere else, and now I'm in that bit, listening to what that bit is. So that's what that bit's about. And design for flexibility. Multiple interaction methods is what I was talking about before, and we'll look at that a little bit later on with the Android developer guidelines, for example. You don't just assume that people are going to be tapping or going to be using a mouse. People who are tabbing through is the same in effect as people who are swiping through when they've got voiceover running, or who are arrowing through in a sort of a web TV environment. They'll be just using the arrow keys on their remote, which is in effect tabbing through your content. So have a look at those. They really do add something to WCAG. So here we've got a URL to the Android accessibility. So if anyone's an Android developer, I can just go on to the next slide if nobody. So have a look at these if you're in any way into Android. And these are very, very similar guidelines to iOS, where you should make proper labels for controls. You should add accessibility to custom controls. You should make sure you don't rely on audio content alone, for example, and that you can move around the content using a D-pad controller, using the swipe gestures built into TalkBack, which is a screen reader built into Android. And at the bottom there it says test with Android, and using the gestures to make sure that your app's accessible. So it's a very similar scenario for iOS. I haven't included some of the guidelines as a bullet list here because we've bulleted out already. And also, it's very, very similar. So I've got a nice picture of, just to hammer home the fact that disabled people, particularly blind people, love their iPhones. In particular, any smartphone will do, but iPhones in particular. So there's the URL for the iOS developer guidelines if you're in that sphere. And this is the last slide for the moment. Again, if you're developing for iOS, there's a really natty inspector which you can run on your Mac to simulate VoiceOver, for example, running, and you can see where the focus is, and you can have it speak out what is going to be spoken, or have it provided as a text message coming up on your screen. So please do have a look at that, and it'll be a real eye-opener. On the desktop side of things, you know, obviously you're all probably still developing on a desktop, you're not all switched over to Xcode on your iPads. Then just run a free screen reader like NVDA over your content. And if you want, drop me a tweet or an email and I can send you some sort of crib sheets about the central keystrokes, you know, the core keystrokes you need to know for a screen reader like NVDA, which is free, and some, you know, top tips for testing your pages for screen reader accessibility. And we're the hardest customers by far to cater for. So if you do it for us, then you'll be 90% of the way there. Sorry. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to just quickly switch over. We're going to have a little interactive session now, guys. Has everybody got anything to sort of draw or make notes with, your phone or a piece of paper and a pen? Okay? This is going to be quick and painless, guys. So, I know you all know about capture. I know you all know about capture. But it is such a bane. And what I would like to do is use it as a parallel, as a symbol for the frustration of inaccessibility for disabled people, or people who are disabled by environment, as we were talking about before. What we're going to do here is I'm going to play a quick video. The code that's up on the screen, the capture image, isn't the same as the one that you're going to hear. You're going to hear it twice. It's the audio capture, the equivalent that you get when you click on the wheelchair symbol, which is a bit of a funny choice of symbol, really. But anyway, so you click on the wheelchair symbol, and you'll get this, okay? So I want you to write it down to the best of your ability in the certain knowledge that if you get one of them wrong, no cigar. Okay? Here we go.
VLC Media Player.
9, 3, 7, 9, 7, once again, 9, 3, 7, 9,
Okay. Welcome to the world of alternative, extremely poor, accessible experience for disabled people. Okay, you've entered my world. This is the internet for me. It's not sexy, it's incredibly frustrating, and it's very limiting. So, the person next to you has done it hopefully as well. Have a look. I'll give you 1 minute or 30 seconds. Afterwards, I'm going to ask if anybody has got the same. Okie dokie. All right then, shout. I would ask you to put hands up, but there's no point. So shout if you have the same as the person next to you. Okay, this is the accessible alternative for people like myself. So I have never been able to successfully do one of those. You know, there were meows in there. There was an O, which, does that mean a 0? Because there were some other zeros. Are they all numbers, in which case you ignore the O? So, I mean, we're kind of laughing about it, but it's an a hugely frustrating experience when there's inaccessibility at every turn on the internet and on mobile apps and that sort of thing. So here we've got a capture, and just to sort of finish off the thought, there are some alternatives. No capture, as Google's thing isn't perfect by any means, particularly on mobile. Maybe it'll get there. Maybe it's better than what we saw a minute ago, perhaps. Textcapture.com is a robust API. It's based on logic questions. I think it's up to 2,000 calls a day, free of charge. So go and have a look at that. That would be my preferred option. And so far, to date, as far as I'm aware, AI hasn't caught up with that. So simple logic questions like that. You might ask yourself, well, what about people with a very significant learning disability? They don't know which of the following is an animal or a fruit. Those people aren't going to be surfing solo. To have got to that web form, to have processed, read all the pages beforehand, to have, clicked on the links and all that sort of thing, they're going to be surfing in a supported way, so you don't necessarily have to worry about those people. So that would be our recommended solution there. Because of time, I'm going to skip over this one, but this is a really groovy summary in like 3 minutes of everything you need to know about web accessibility. So have a look at that when I tweet it around, and I'll send the links to Simon as well afterwards, but I think, out of respect for time. So I was talking about AI not being able to handle logic questions, but AI is actually incredibly clever these days, and there are a lot of virtual assistants around. And from a usability point of view, for disabled people, it's an absolute gift because it cuts through the huge complexity of desktop websites, for example, or complicated or difficult apps to use, and you can cut straight to the chase. So I'm just going to give a quick blast of this chap who's using a virtual assistant in its most sort of reduced form. It's basically a little electronic peanut that you stick in your ear.
Okay, Moto, how many ounces in 2 cups?
16 ounces.
Okay, Moto, call Dad.
Calling Dad.
Hey, son, did you borrow my tools again?
Okay, Moto, post to Facebook. Rematch accepted, Brad.
Posting status update.
I'm going to pause it there, sorry about that. So what's this got to do with you guys? Well, I mean, it's basically this idea about accessibility. Think about the various different ways that people are going to be accessing your content. In this case, the screen isn't big, isn't small, it's not there. It's not there at all. So what's the UI there? What's the input and output? It's radically different. You might say, well, how can that be made totally inclusive? It doesn't have to be. There are a myriad of other choices of wearables or devices that can deliver the same functionality, but the websites and apps that you guys are delivering, they're not optional. It's probably the only one of the thing that you're doing. So this is niche, it's absolutely fantastic. It hopefully will give you an idea of thinking about things. There are so many alternatives, and redundancy is absolutely at the core of what we're talking about here. If you can't do it in one way, the layers of accessibility that you've added, you've enhanced your websites and your apps with, as they get peeled away, there'll always be another layer that somebody will be able to use to their full advantage, regardless of what method they're using.
Enhanced conf dash 6 Pepsi's unbelievable bus.
This is my lady. It's nice, isn't it? A bit fast maybe, but I'm just going to quickly finish off with a blast from, this is an actual bus stop apparently in London. I don't know if anyone of you have happened across it. This is a Pepsi advert, but I'm assured that it is actually a real bus stop, and I'll explain why on earth I'm showing this a little bit later on.
VLC Media Play.
Let me flip this script. I feel privileged for all who can witness this. I am close to divine. Though the moment is mine, the moment of sign. To all the squares that ask around, we getting it. My skills pay me. I'm trying to get a million, baby, with an adopted flow that God gave me. Tell whoever runners that they spot is temporary till I think I got that one. Tell Miss I'm on my road trip. So when we cash out soon, I'm just investing.
I'm telling you, this is how it works, man. There's a little camera right here.
So, I'll just pause it there. So, we were talking about AI a moment ago, now we're talking about AR, and I think this is going to be a hugely growing area. Obviously, HoloLens, a number of others, many apps for the ill-fated Google Glass, which I think is going to be reborn very soon, using AR to augment people's experiences. The question then to you guys would be, if you were doing an AR project, how would you layer on accessibility? How would you make sure that it was inclusive and fit for purpose for every single customer? With the various apps for glass, it's also got a bone-conducting speaker. So for me, I would want those, nav directions to be spoken to me as well, that sort of thing. So think about how you would layer on accessibility for something as really radical as, a pane of glass. When people see through it, it gives them augmented information about their surroundings, admittedly in a very flippant way.
Enhanced
with that one.
7 Felix.
I'm going to finish off then with a quick video. I've edited this one myself, so apologies for the really awful editing of this, but a quick summary of this chap, Felix Baumgartner, who went up to the edge of space and jumped off a big balloon.
VLC.
Release.
All right, now, the whole road is looking down. I'm going over.
Jumper away. Speed 725. Showing Felix in a stable descent. And Felix is back to record holder.
The reason why I wanted to show that was because up on the edge of space on his little platform, he was wearing a really cool visor, this headset thing, and it had a huge HUD on it, heads-up display, with all his instrumentation. It would say his speed, his altitude, all that sort of thing. And as soon as he jumped off, this thing steamed up, completely. He was obviously breathing very heavily. I don't blame him at all. Or maybe it was the scarcity of the atmosphere, I don't know. But this sort of really sexy heads-up display was completely useless. And there was no redundancy, there was no backup, there was no layers that he could peel off to get to an alternative version. He had no, toggle that he could press to get haptic feedback at every 1,000 feet or something. So he was heading for 2 world records that day. The highest jump, which he got nearly 25 miles up on the edge of space. So he got that one as soon as he jumped off. He was also after the longest free fall, didn't get that one, completely panicked, and pulled his cord really, really early, sooner than he intended, which I don't blame him at all for doing. You don't know where the ground is, you've got no visibility or instrumentation. So he didn't get the other one, he didn't get the longest free fall. Now, arguably that could have been a life or death situation. And we're not saying that it's going to be life or death, depending on how inclusive your products that you're designing are.
8 outro.
I'll just bring up the last slide. But it could make all the difference. Hopefully you got the flavor from me about how important accessibility is to people that rely on it. And increasingly in this mobile-first world where we're all living on the edge on a daily basis, what you do will matter in this area for a lot more people than just someone like myself who has this permanent disability. So please think about everyone, not just us. Thank you. All right, thank you. All right,